This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. Woo! I've only done that intro like 165 times, and I'm fumbling it still. So, guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for finding the show. If you're new to it, I encourage you to binge listen. All the content is evergreen. Just really great interviews. No credit to me. All credit goes to the guests of law enforcement officers and the amazing calls and careers that they have. The whole idea of the show was to get these guys and gals stories in full detail, unedited, to give people a better appreciation for what it is police officers and law enforcement really do. So thank you for being here. If you're a return listener, I appreciate you. I thank you. If you love the show, 5-star review on your favorite app, whatever app you listen to the show on, would be great. And if you really love the show and you want to show some love monetarily, you can do that through Patreon. The link is in the show notes. There's 2 levels. There's a sergeant level and there's a patrolman level. You get different things with each one. And it's just a way to keep the lights on, keep the boat afloat over here, pays the bills at the end of the month for the podcast expenses and then some. So I truly appreciate that. If you can't afford it or it's not in the cards right now, I totally understand. The show will remain free, as always, 4 times a month so that everybody can hear these great stories. So today's guest has got an extensive resume. I'm extremely excited to talk to this guy. It's so big. I took a clip from it, just the greatest hits, but not even, because there's so much more on it. We won't have enough time to talk about it all, but he's going to share some killer stories. He's also a best-selling author. He's a legendary undercover agent, former Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics Regional Commander, a Baton Rouge police officer, career federal prosecutor, Department of Justice attaché for Iraq, and a Marine who fought as squad leader in Vietnam. Without further ado, let me bring on Charlie Spillers. Charlie!
Hey, Steve, thank you for having me on your program. And thank you for having a program where police officers can come on and talk about the profession, talk about their experiences. That kind of thing is very important nowadays. By the way, you mentioned my resume. My resume also says that my work in Iraq as the Justice Attaché in Iraq was commended by the Deputy Attorney General, the FBI Director, the Italian Embassy, Britain's Minister of State for the Armed Forces, and the British Ambassador. Your law enforcement viewers and listeners will appreciate this. I used to think commendations like that meant something. But then I came back from the grocery store a few weeks ago, put the groceries on the counter, and turned away, and my wife started going through the bags, putting stuff away, and behind me I heard her say, "The milk." And I said, "What? The milk?" I said, "Well, it should be in one of the bags." I don't see the milk, but it's in the bag. No, I don't see the milk. You were supposed to get milk, but you didn't get the milk. And I said, but I've been commended by the British ambassador. I don't care. You forgot the milk. So, as your law enforcement listeners and viewers know, it doesn't matter how many commendations you've received. Doesn't matter how many thousands of books you've sold. You still have to remember what to pick up at the grocery store. You still have to put out the trash can on trash day. And you still have to pay full price, or in my case, senior price for a cup of coffee. And your law enforcement listeners also know that one all crap letter wipes out a dozen Databoy letters, right? So we all know that. You talked about my undercover career. I started with Baton Rouge Police Department.
Okay.
First two months in uniform patrol, and then the captain in charge of the new intelligence division asked if he could come to our apartment and have coffee. And he came over one night and explained they had a new intelligence unit, and he asked me if I'd be interested in going undercover, deep cover. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded exciting, so I jumped at it. And he told me, don't come to the police station, stay completely away. You'll write reports, and your reports, you just put a number, not your name, and infiltrate criminals, especially career criminals. So that was my job as an intelligence agent, deep cover, in Baton Rouge trying to infiltrate career criminals. And I wind up infiltrating a group of burglars and safecrackers that uh, led to some pretty exciting times. And I learned from them a very early lesson, learned it early on about criminals. I was sitting in a bar in the middle of the afternoon, undercover. I was with Randy, a safecracker, a renowned safecracker, his associate Candyman.
Your new
And three,
friends.
yeah, three of us were sitting at the bar on stools, Randy on the right, Candyman in the middle. And while we're sitting there, and that bar was sort of the headquarters for criminals around the area. And while we're sitting there, Randy, the safecracker, reaches under his shirt. He pulls out a Blue Steel 38. He says, "Hey, I got this last night." He passes it to Candyman, looks it over. Candyman passes it to me. I look it over. Of course, you know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, I need to get the serial number so I can put the serial number in my intelligence report when I write an intelligence report tonight. And obviously it's been stolen. It'll be used in crimes. But I could, even though it was in the middle of the afternoon, the bar was dim and I couldn't see the serial number. So I said, "Hey, Randy, I can use this." I reached and I slipped it in my pocket. And I said, "I'll give it back to you tomorrow." Oh, you thought I would have stirred up a hornet's nest with a stick. All of a sudden, Randy was, Mike. I was using the name Mike. Mike, give it back, Candyman. Give it back. I mean, they were furious. I mean, they were in a frenzy and acting like a tough guy. I said, "Hey, I'll give it back tomorrow." And I went to take a taste of my drink, my beer, and all of a sudden, ooh, in my right side, I felt something. And I looked down, and Candyman had stuck his gun in my side.
Oof.
And his finger was on the trigger, and he leaned over and said, "Give it back, Mike, give it back." And I thought, and I was thinking fast, well, we're in a public place, even though it's their hangout, middle of the day. He probably won't shoot me. At least I hope not. And I said, "Hey, man, I'll give it back tomorrow." And I went to take another drink, and about that time, I heard click,
Ooh.
click. And you know, when you cock a revolver, it makes a click and you can barely hear the click. But when it's stuck in your side, click, you can hear it. And I looked down, the hammer was all the way back on his 38. His finger was on the trigger and it was jammed in my side. I said, "Okay." His eyes started glazing over. Well, you know what I was worried about? I still wasn't too worried, although I was worried. I wasn't that worried that he would intentionally kill me right there. But what I was worried was he might accidentally kill me because all it takes is a
Right.
little pressure,
Once
just
it's
a little.
cocked.
And I was, look, you know what that is? That's my alarm clock alerting me that
I lost you.
that we're supposed to have an interview later. There we go. Hold on. I think I've lost you, haven't I? Or have I?
No, we're still here. I just can't see you. Um,
I yeah, I can't see you either. Yep, my alarm interfered with that. Uh, Hold on. Let me see. Hey,
there you are.
are you there?
Yeah. No, I'm gone now.
Let's see. Steve,
There we
are
go.
you
I can
there?
see you now. Yeah, yeah.
Hello. First to Steve, over.
Can you hear me at all?
Steve,
I'm here, brother.
hello. Steve.
Yep, I'm here. Oh, boy. There we go.
Hey, Steve. Hey, I'm sorry. That was my clock alarm I'd set to remind me to connect with you about a half an hour from now, but we started early.
That's all right. I can edit that right out in the podcast. No big deal.
I thought you could. I thought you could. All right. Well, as I was saying, I heard all of a sudden I heard a click, and when guns stuck in your side, you can hear it. And I was praying. I was praying fast, by the way. Don't sneeze. Don't hiccup. Don't cough. Don't have a spasm. Don't anybody just walk by and happen to bump him with their shoulder. Oh boy, and I was sweating. And I said, okay, okay, I'll give the gun back. I'll give the gun back. But I need to make sure I move deliberately because if I went too quick, he might instinctively jerk the trigger without meaning to. So I said,
Right.
okay, I give it back. So very deliberately, I reach in my pocket, pick the gun out, and I slip it past Candyman to Randy, the safecracker. Well, during all this time, the cocked gun's still in my side. So I bring my arm back. But now here came the dangerous part. Candyman uncocked the gun, but he uncocked it with it still in my side. Of course, you know how you uncock a revolver. You uncock a revolver by putting your thumb on the
Yeah,
on
riding
the
it down.
yeah, you put your thumb on the hammer and you pull the trigger and you try to hold the hammer back. And I say try because occasionally the hammer might slip, and if it does, pow! And in fact, I was telling my neighbor, who's a firearms instructor, about that. And he said, yeah, on the range, twice when he was doing instruction for students, twice he's had revolvers that he was uncocking go off when he was trying to, safely uncock them. So he uncocked it, pulling the trigger, trying to hold the hammer back. And I say, and you try to lower it slowly. And I say, slowly, because if you lower it too fast, bam! And
Right.
I could just imagine my guts, a bullet blasting through my guts and splattering them all over the floor as he was uncocking it. And it took probably maybe 3 seconds from the time he pulled the trigger and started lowering the hammer, maybe 3 full seconds until the hammer was all the way down and was safe. Now think about this. How long does 3 seconds last? Well, if we're talking here, 3 seconds goes pretty quickly.
Right.
If you're in a dentist chair and he's drilling on a painful tooth, how long does 3 seconds last then? Well, those 3 seconds felt like a lifetime in the world. Everything just froze. And this, as I've told people before, this normal world that we're all part of, you're part of, this walking, talking, breathing world, for those 3 seconds, I wasn't in that world. Those 3 seconds would seem like a lifetime. Were gone forever, forever.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and after he lowered the hammer, we were all friends again, although they were very lethal and vicious friends, and we were back at it. But as I said, that was early in my
That's
10-year undercover career, and I learned a very, very important lesson about criminals. That I learned that criminals do not practice firearm safety.
yeah, who'd have thought?
That's true. I mean, your law enforcement listeners all know that. And as I wrote in my book, I wrote other times when I was with criminals and they didn't practice firearm safety. Maybe we need to have a training session for them. They can come in, look, they can come in ski masks and write down a fake name, and then we train them how to be safe around firearms, right?
Yeah, we'll bring them in. We'll get them all licensed so they can legally carry and give them a little class.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, if you don't mind, Uh, I'd like to relate a few experiences of colleagues and friends of mine, others, that go to the heart of our profession, which is the dedication, courage, sacrifice, and compassion. The things that mark law enforcement as a special profession. A few years ago, I was the keynote speaker for the Louisiana Narcotics Officers Association in New Orleans for their annual conference. Great conference, which lasted several days. I mean, just huge attendance. And the presidents of some other state narcotic officers association always come as honored guests. And the president of the Tennessee Narcotics Officers Association was there. During a break, he and I were talking, and he said, I'm up, I forget where he said, Nashville or Knoxville, Nashville or Knoxville, or he said, by the way, did you ever see a video that recently came out? It's a car police unit video, shows a traffic stop, a guy walking back to the car. Then all of a sudden he shoots the police officer 5 times and the officer's screaming. You can't see the officer. And I don't normally happen to look for those videos, but I just happened to have seen that when I said, yeah, God, that was terrible. And the president of the Tennessee Association said, that was my partner. And he said,
Wow.
I was on I heard that call. I heard the call go out when he was shot. And I rushed to the scene. And when I got there, the ambulance was there. They were loading him up. And they said, look, he's not going to make it. He probably won't make it alive to the hospital. And he looked like he definitely wasn't going to make it. He said, so I went to climb in the ambulance when they loaded him up. And they said, no, you can't do that. You can't ride in the ambulance. And he said, well, I'm going. And he said, so I rode in the ambulance with him to the hospital. And he said, the reason I did that, I was sure he was going to die. I didn't want him to die alone in front of just strangers. And
Mm,
that's why I rode to the hospital. You know, to me, that's the kind of loyalty to each other that marks our profession. That thing there. Miraculously, the officer survived the 5 gunshots. But I mean, what a testament, though, to loyalty to each other about the officer doing that. Love that story. Uh,
absolutely.
I'll mention a few others. In northeast Mississippi, just a few years ago, the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics agent, Chuck Smith, who later became regional commander, took my place, went out to a rural county to assist deputy marshals arrest a man on child pornography charges. And the marshals stationed Chuck on this little country road just as a way to block the guy if he tried to escape by vehicle out that road. So Chuck was sitting there on the side of this deserted road. And while he was sitting there, all of a sudden he saw a car rushing toward him head on. And it looked like it was going to crash into his car. So Chuck leaned over in the seat and braced himself. As he did, the car stopped, screeched a halt beside him, and two men jumped out. One had a 357 Magnum, pointed at Chuck, ordered him out of the car. And Chuck was wearing a Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics vest, not a vest, but a jacket with the badge on it and all that. It was plain who he was, state police. And the man said, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you, you MF. Turned out it was a relative of the man being arrested. The man was pointed right at Chuck's chest. I'm going to kill you, you MF. About that time, there was a sound in the distance. The man looked over his shoulder, and when he did, Chuck whipped out his pistol and bam, shot the guy in the chest. He dropped to the ground. Chuck backed the other guy away, quickly called on the radio for help. The man he shot in the chest was still alive. Chuck, who had been an EMT before becoming an agent, then started administering life saving aid. Now, think about that. Here's a police officer administering life saving aid, saving the life someone who 60 seconds before was going to kill him. I mean,
Yeah,
to me, to me, that tells everything you want to know about our profession, about what it means to be a professional law enforcement officer in the United States and America. Well, because of Chuck, the man lived long enough to get on the medevac chopper. They medevaced him to the trauma center in Memphis, and he lived. He survived. The agent saved the life of a man trying to kill him. I love that story too because, again, that says everything about our profession, and it says everything about the kind of officer all of us should always aspire to be. Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, and officers get in trouble now if you don't render aid even after you shoot the bad guy.
yeah, it's a shame that things have gotten as bad as they were. Let me relate a couple other stories too.
Charlie, I
Uh,
wanted to ask you a question.
yeah, yeah,
Do you think you said you were assigned to intelligence early on? Now, is that do you think because you were so new that nobody knew your face yet, they wanted to get you off the road and you had an aptitude for it?
yes, it was because I was new. I'd been born in Baton Rouge, but had not lived there since I was about 5, and I just moved back. Just been on the police department in a uniform patrol for 2 months. And by the time, I'd served in Vietnam as a Marine squad leader and come back, so I was hardened for that. But I wasn't known, so that's why, I was picked out and asked if I would go undercover. And my job wasn't to make cases, it was to gather intelligence, do intelligence reports, and then they would sometimes pass on the information to detectives without detectives knowing it came from an undercover officer. And I served undercover for 6 years in
Wow.
intelligence, and then in narcotics. Of course, infiltrating drug trafficking groups, making buys, leading to big roundups and buy bust things like that. 6 years, and then the first 5 years with Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics undercover. I think uh, as I point out, uh, in my last undercover operation, I wore a three-piece suit and played the role of a wealthy businessman in Memphis, tied in with organized crime in the Northeast. And I dealt with pilots who smuggled plane loads of drugs for the uh, Marcello Mafia organization based in New Orleans.
Mm.
Uh, when they wound up losing a couple plane loads of drugs, not realizing how that came about, they put that pilot I was dealing with on a back burner, and then he unknowingly connected me up with a smuggling organization in Mexico and in Texas, and I wound up eventually going to Houston, Texas, and they delivered 3,000 pounds of marijuana to me. Which, looking back on it, I wish I had rented a bigger U-Haul truck because the one I rented was packed so full I was afraid it was going to tip over.
You're getting everybody on the road high when they're following you.
Yeah. Let me relate another experience about law enforcement. When I was the regional commander of the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, I was based in Oxford, and I had 4 district officers, 4 lieutenants. I was on the phone one day. This was about 1980. I was on the phone one day with one of my lieutenants in the Delta, Dennis McAnally, and while we were talking, he said, "Yeah, I've got all the agents in the office. We're going to go get something to eat over at such and such restaurant, and Charlene is here." He was talking about Charlene Anderson, uh, one of his agents. Charlene's here, and she told us what she wants, and we're going to get a takeout plate for her and bring it back. Uh, well, the reason that Charlene wasn't going is the restaurant they were going to in downtown was the most popular restaurant in town, but it had a sign on the door saying private club. And if you were white, you could walk in and you were automatically considered a member. But if you weren't, then you weren't automatically admitted. But
Wow.
Charlene was a black female agent, one of the groundbreaking females in law enforcement, groundbreaking black female in law enforcement, especially in the South. And she loved the food from there too. And so that's why we would have them pick up the plate in this place where judges and cops and businessmen, workmen, everybody ate.
How awful,
And
huh?
yeah, so McAnally was telling me, yeah, we're going to pick up a plate for Charlene, bring it back. And I said, Dennis, Mac, you realize what you just told me? He said, what? What's that? I said, you just told me you're going to a place where a fellow law enforcement officer, a fellow agent can't go. And there was silence on the other end. And then suddenly Mac said, oh my God, Charlie, you're right. God, I never even thought about that. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, the agents didn't go back. They never went back. And they never went back because a fellow law enforcement officer, Charlene, couldn't go. Uh, by the way, I make it a point when I'm in that town now, and that place is still the most popular. I make it a point to eat there because the food is so good, and now everyone's welcome there. Everyone's welcome. You know, it's a popular place. Charlene, by the way, later I recommended her, and later she became Agent of the Year for the state.
Nice.
Later, later when Mac left, I recommended her as the district supervisor, and she became the lieutenant there. She wound up having a distinguished career with the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. I think she retired as a colonel, and she became the police chief of Jackson, Mississippi, the first black female police chief in Jackson. But I like that too, because to me, we're talking about our profession and the fact that, you know, we're not white, brown, green, or whatever. We're law enforcement officers. And the color of the blood is red or it's the blue family.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Uh,
That's
and
unbelievable.
yeah, it is. Especially in 1980, that was one of the real throwback places where that still existed.
Wow, that
Uh,
was 1980, Charlie?
1980.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
It is. And as I say now, it's popular with everyone, and everyone's welcome there, and has been for decades now, which is the way to be. Of course, you got to understand that was in the Delta. And imagine what it was like for Shirley Anderson, a black female agent, working in the Delta when you had sheriffs over there who, many of them were untrained. Uh, they didn't want to tolerate women in law enforcement at all, and especially a black female. But uh, unsurprisingly, after Shirlene had served in the Delta for a while and as an agent and as the lieutenant, when I talk on the phone with sheriffs or meet sheriffs, they unanimously praised her. I mean, they praised her. She changed a lot of minds about females in law enforcement and black females in law enforcement. She was highly respected.
She must have had a thick skin.
Oh yeah, yeah, great person, great person. What I'm here uh, telling stories after stories. Do you have anything you want to ask in between?
Yeah, I mean, I know I can tell you got a lot of good ones. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do have some questions that the listeners usually expect me to ask, and I don't think you're going to have any issue with them. I want to ask you a strange or bizarre thing you dealt with in law enforcement.
Uh, I I don't know what that would be. You have to understand. The first 10 years I worked in law enforcement, except for the first 2 months in uniform. First 10 years was all undercover, and what that means is uh, my typical day was bizarre thing. I
Sure.
mean, I mean that's my typical day. So I don't know how else to answer that.
Okay. Yeah. I did you. I think I hope I sent these to you ahead of time. You might not have got them. That's probably why you're not loaded and ready. But I know what you're saying. Absolutely. Can you tell us about a intense or terrifying moment from being undercover or overseas? Anything, any part of your career?
Well, well, think about what we just talked about. A cocked gun in my side,
Yep.
and the gun being uncocked while it was still in my side. It doesn't get any more intense, than that. Uh, I was on my way to meet Junior and to buy 1 ounce of heroin from Junior. I told the topside investigators, this was when I was undercover in narcotics, told the topside investigators, look, when I buy from him, instead of a buy and walk, let's go ahead and make it a buy bust. And when you hear me give the code word over the wire, y'all come in like gangbusters and arrest Junior and pretend you arrest me. And that helped keep me cool maybe for another couple months with, his group of people.
Sure.
So, I was wearing the wire and I was in my car heading to meet Junior, middle of the afternoon. And on my way to meet Junior, I was a little worried because at the last minute, the investigators called in uniform units to help out, but they didn't tell the uniform units that I was the heat. That I
Important
was,
information.
yeah, that I was the police, and of course I wouldn't have wanted them to tell the uniform units because the way you get burned down undercover is when law enforcement officers, whether they with your agency or not, tell other trusted friends and they tell others, and then words out and you get burned down.
Right.
Uh, but they did not tell the uniform units that I was the heat. So as I'm driving down to meet Junior, I'm thinking, gosh, I hope nothing goes wrong because if anything happens, those uniform guys might riddle the car and everybody in it, meaning me, Junior, and me. So I'm driving down to meet Junior and I'm wearing a wire and the wire's tucked under my belt, wires going up under my shirt, the mic is in the hollow of my shoulder blade, so to pick up, both of us conversation. And as I park, Junior's parked facing some apartments. He's parked on the street facing in. I parked beside Junior. I tuck my Model 6038 under my seat because I think, well, that's going to get in the way during the bust. So I tuck it under the seat and I get in the car with Junior. And I sit in his passenger seat. And he's sitting behind the wheel. And he looks me over, and then his head's on the swivel, and he's looking all over, and he's jumping, and he's wired. The drug dealer had sent him as a runner, and the guy is nervous and wired, and he's jumpy. I mean, he's all over the gun. It's a semi-automatic pistol, and his finger's on the trigger, and he's jumping. He's like this, boy. And he's jumping all over. And when I saw that, I was wanting to jump all over, but of course you can't do that undercover. So I'm trying to quell that. But you know what I needed to do? Here he is. He's got to get. You know what I need to do over the wire? I need to let the investigators who are listening over a kill unit. I need to let them know he's got a gun. Drug dealers often have guns, but they don't always have them out in their hand like that. Ready.
Right.
So I need to let them know. And I said, "Hey, man, why you got a gun? Man, you don't need a gun. Why you got that gun?" And I say it. I say it 3 times, and I say it loud. And the reason is, as you know, those body wires don't always work. And when they do work, sometimes they go in and come out. And other times there's a lot of static. So I'm saying it several times. Gun, why you got a gun, man? What I wanted to do was just my shoulder where the mic was and say, gun, 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 why you got a gun? But of course I didn't do that. And so all of a sudden, somebody comes out of an apartment and he jumps up with the gun. Somebody walks by the sidewalk and he's like this. A car rumbles by and he's like this. And I'm thinking, man, he's going to pop somebody. I better get this. I better get this bus going. And so I said, man, hey, what about the smack? The smack, you got the smack me in heroin. He doesn't hear me because he's intense. I say, you got the smack? Yeah, 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 yeah. And he reaches and he passes it with his left hand, a baggy ½ ounce of tan powder, the heroin. I'm looking over that and I say, 800, right? And he's looking, 800, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And boy, he's like this. And so I reach in my pocket for the flash roll. And as I'm reaching in my pocket, I give the code word for the bust. And I told the investigators, when you hear me say Coke, Coke, that's the come in like gangbusters. That's the code word for the come in like gangbusters. So I say, hey man, by the way, can you give me some Coke? Because if you can give me some Coke, I'd really like some Coke. And I'm saying it 3 times and I'm saying it loud. And, hoping they'll hear it over. And what I wanted to do was look at my shoulder and say, Coke, Coke, Coke. Can anybody give me Coke? But, and about the third time, I said the word Coke on both sides. There were these roaring, powerful engines. You could almost smell rubber burn and smoke coming out. And police cars were rushing with flashing lights from both sides, just rushing at us like in a racetrack. And when they did, Junior grabbed the heroin, threw it out the window, and he reached up with his gun to his open window to start shooting. And I grabbed his arm, and I'm still thinking, you know, and I'm thinking in microseconds. I'm still thinking maybe I can keep my cover and if I can't, I've got to dive on him. So I grab his arm with my arm and say, no, man, don't. And he jerks it away, and I grab it one more time, a last desperate effort. No, don't, that'll be murder. And he hesitated, and he dropped the gun, and all of a sudden, bam, the officers were there, hands up, hands up, hands up. On my side of the car, were two uniform officers, and they had 357s then. They were both pointing 357s from a few feet away toward my head, and their fingers were on the trigger.
That's not a great feeling.
No, and boy, they were hands up, hands up, hands up, and I'm like this, and if it had been a convertible, my fingers would have gone through the top. Hands, and I'm trying not to move. Don't move, hands up. And boy, all of a sudden on the other side of the car, someone had seen the gun, and they yelled, "Gun!" They had a gun. They had a gun. And when it said that, the two officers, boy, their faces turned red, their eyes were big, their fingers were tight, and they were yelling, hands up, hands up, hands up, don't move, don't move, don't move. And
Oh,
you saw that picture on my book of me, and that's me on the cover with the hair. And my hair was like that then. And I was thinking, hair don't move, hair don't move, don't move, don't move an inch. And, and the two officers, all of a sudden, one of them yelled, get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car. And I thought, don't do that real quickly. I've got to open it. Don't do it quickly because if I do, he might
yeah.
mistake jerk the trigger. So I thought, deliberately move. So I start moving my hand down to open the door. I'm hoping I'm going fast enough, but not too fast. So I'm moving one hand down to the door handle. And as I do, the officer beside him yelled, hands up, hands up. I said, hands up. And I said, whoa, whoa. And then the other officer yelled, get out of the car. I said, get out of the car. And I, hands up, get out, get in.
Oh, jeez.
Look. The two officers were side by side. The adrenaline was pumping. I was a threat to them. There was
Sure.
a gun, was a drug dealer. They both had tunnel vision and tunnel hearing, and they weren't hearing what each one was saying. All they knew was I wasn't complying by getting out of the car, and I wasn't complying by keeping both hands up. And I was thinking, God, they're going to kill me. Get up, get my hands up. And I was sweating. Oh, no. Oh. And about that time, one of the investigators ran around and pulled the door open. He grabbed me, jerked me out of the car, and it slammed me against the hood to make it look, and bam, bam, bam. And it never felt so good to be manhandled by the police. Ooh, oh, felt so. And then they put the cuffs on and put them on too tight just to make it look good. Drove me away from the scene. And I think I wrote in the book when I wrote about that night, I thought, it'd been a good day because I didn't get shot by a drug dealer and I didn't get shot by the police. So it was a good day in the life of an undercover. So those kind of questions that you normally ask officers, what's close call, what's this, what's that, for me, that kind of became routine, especially for those who've read my book. There were uh, maybe a half a dozen times when I went in to a house, apartment, or somewhere like that to make a drug buy, and there'd be more than one person there, and it turned out that the person I was going to buy from was someone I'd busted maybe a year before. And I was by myself, and my gun was in the car, and I didn't have surveillance. I mean, so when
Please
you
don't
ask,
recognize me.
oh yeah, and yeah, so when you ask people about close calls or bizarre things, yeah, that wound up becoming too much of a routine thing. And you know what? It didn't affect me at all. Yeah,
As you twitch.
yeah, didn't affect me at all. Uh,
Charlie, how did you make the transition from working stateside to going overseas?
I was after spending 18 years as a law enforcement officer and agent and commander. I earned a law degree while working full time and going to law school part time, which, as I advise people who are thinking about that, don't do it the way I did. It just about killed me.
I
Uh,
bet.
you're consumed by work and studies, and you don't have time for anything else, nothing else. Anyway, after that, uh, I was fortunate to join the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor, and I was an OCDF prosecutor and worked on major drug trafficking groups, violent crimes, violent street gangs, uh, and white collar crime. And after the invasion in Iraq, the Department of Justice around 2006 or 7 put out an announcement asking for volunteers, uh, federal prosecutors who wanted to volunteer to go to Iraq to serve as a advisor, an attorney advisor to the Iraqi court, the Iraqi High Tribunal that was trying Saddam Hussein, chemical and others. And I applied, went through a selection process and selected and went over. So that's how I wound up in Iraq and wound up doing the tours were half a year each. I wound up doing 2 tours in Iraq, advising the Iraqi High Tribunal, and then a third tour for 10 more months as the justice attache for Iraq, working on Al Qaeda, uh, chemical weapons, Hezbollah commander that was orchestrating attacks against American and British troops. So that's how I wound up
Wow, that's
over.
interesting. What a career change. I mean, when you're advising Iraqi justices and stuff, it was an attempt for us to make them more their laws or their rulings more Western. Was that the idea? Because I'm sure they have a totally different set of laws than us.
They do. It's two different systems of law, and we were over there as part of the rule of law, which the key thing is to make a justice system depend upon laws and not people, not politicians, not who's in power. So you go over there as part of that, and we provide training to the justice, to the judges, and we provide advice, and we did just about everything we could for them, except actually go into the courtroom with them when they were trying the cases. There, it was Iraqi prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges, and they did all that work. Later on, I collaborated with the British government in a war crimes case in the High Court of England and Wales that involved uh, 2 Iraqi intelligence officials who had murdered 2 British POW troops they captured during the invasion.
Wow.
Uh, and the key thing, my value to the British was that I was able to serve as an expert witness on the Iraqi High Tribunal and detail in about a 50 something page written sworn statement how they operated, what their laws and rules of procedure were, and the kinds of things that would help safeguard the rights of the 2 Iraqis who were going to be tried. And British Public Lawyers Association in Britain opposed the British government turning over the 2 Iraqi defendants to the Iraqi High Tribunal for trial. saying that they would just be summarily tried and then executed. So the British thought that the case was probably lost until I served as an expert witness, and I think that helped, or according to them, swing things around. The High Court ruled in favor of the British government turning over the prisoners. The defendants rushed to the European Court of Human Rights in France to try to block it. In the meantime, the UK defense minister went ahead and turned over the prisoners, making that mute. Uh, as a side note, the two Iraqis were eventually tried by the Iraqi High Tribunal, and uh, and they were found not guilty. There was insufficient evidence, which of course is another thing that shows that the allegations that be summarily tried and executed were incorrect. But anyway, that's
Interesting.
among the things we did.
You take your
So
wife with you?
no, no, no.
You didn't get in
You know,
trouble for this?
I did. For me though, for me and others, those in our military and others served in Iraq. Iraq was dangerous, and at the embassy, we during the times I served there, we often had incoming rockets and mortars, things like that. But the real hardship about serving in Iraq for most people is family separation, family
Sure.
separation, and a real hardship. Yeah, yeah. My wife. I remember when I told my wife I was going. I said we were getting ready for bed, and I said, "Hey, by the way, remember I told you that the Department of Justice was seeking volunteers for Iraq?" She said, "Yeah, I told you if you ever want to do something like that, you need to go ahead and do it while you're thinking about it." And I said, "Well, I did. I went ahead and applied." "Well, good. Are they going to have a selection process?" And I said, "Yeah, I already had an interview." "Oh," she said, "well, good. When will you hear something?" I said, "Well, I've heard back." And what they say? And I said, "Well, I leave in 30 days."
Ooh.
Ooh. So now she says, if when we're together, and I say, "Oh, by the way," she does. Yeah. So it's extremely hard on families.
I,
Uh,
I can imagine. Did you
yeah.
make it? Did you make any Iraqi friends over there that you kept in touch with?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There were some great people. I admire the Iraqis. I admire their courage, their dedication and compassion. I'm from the South, and I think that helped me quite a bit because, of course, the Iraqis, the Arabs, have this history of being courteous and very generous people, and their hospitality. They're known for their hospitality, and we have that some of that in the South. The difference was if we had DOJ attorneys from other parts of the country who were helping advise the Iraqi tribunal, oftentimes they'd go in to meet with a judge and they'd get right down to business. The judge would appreciate when I or maybe some others like me would come in and have a small talk first before we got into the business part of it. So that helped out. By the way, one story about that, I tried to learn Iraqi Arabic phrases from my translators, and I'd write them down phonetically at night, and then I'd practice them. I got where I could say a few words like "Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam," "Kuli zin," and I would try out those phrases on the judges. And one day I was meeting with the judge and my translator, and I had a new phrase, and it was something very respectful, and I said it to the judge, and all of a sudden the judge got red faced, agitated. He looked at the translator and he was talking in Arabic, and I had no idea what they were saying. You could see the judge was upset, and the translator, boy, he was trying to explain over there back and forth. I said, "What is it? What is it?" The translator brushed me off. Well, they're back and forth, back and forth. What is it? You could tell the judge was upset. I said, what is it? And finally, the translator turns to me and says, "The judge wants to know why you want to burn his house down."
Whoops.
Oh no, it doesn't. It doesn't take much to learn to get a word wrong. It's something like I forget which one it is, mashgul and mashul. One of them means "Are you busy?" and the other means "Are you crazy?" So if you go in and say mashul, or mashgul, and you say the wrong word or you say it the wrong way, you're saying "Are you crazy?" instead of "Are you busy?" So anyway,
Yeah,
that,
I met a nice Iraqi guy when I did fraud investigation for insurance in Southern California. This
uh-huh.
mom and pop insurance business, I was doing a fraud investigation, so I sat there with this guy for half an hour, and his family, very nice guy. He was his family was Iraqi, and they came over after Saddam fell. But really interesting twist he put on it was he said they're a big Christian family. I'm a Christian, and I said, "Oh, that's very interesting." And he said, "Yeah, the unforeseen problem with Saddam falling." He said Saddam employed all the people that handled his food were Christians because they knew Christians wouldn't poison him. So
Oh,
so
how
Saddam liked Christians and he protected them. And he said after he was executed, they just started killing Christians. Like
mm,
like it was
mm,
like protection gone, time to leave. And he said that's why my family left, because when the dust settled and everything else Saddam was removed, he said then the protection for Christians was gone. And I was like, geez, I've never even heard that before.
oh, that's interesting. Well, that's why when I was over there, I got involved with the Italian embassy when I was serving for the Department of Justice because Tariq Aziz, one of the high-level regime figures being tried by the Iraqi High Tribunal, he was prominent. He was the uh, highest placed Catholic in Iraq, and he was highly respected in Italy. And the Italian government, and of course the Italian embassy, they were very concerned that he wouldn't get a fair and proper trial. So they got in touch with us to find out how things work, to get introductions to the court and things like that. So I dealt with the Italian government and embassy for quite a while over that, satisfied their concerns, and he had attorneys come down from Rome, and we accommodated them, brought them over to the Iraqi High Tribunal, satisfied their concerns. But the Vatican, the Vatican was very concerned, and the nuncio of Iraq got involved, and again, we satisfied his concerns. So, yeah, it's an interesting dynamics over in Iraq. Interesting situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy what you said about the language too. Like I read the Bible, but I'm far from a scholar. But like my pastor and stuff, they know Greek and they know Arabic and all that stuff. And those words, they don't only can mean three different things. They can also be numbers. They can be all kinds of stuff. So I could see how a little bit of knowledge got you into hot water.
Oh, yeah. Here I am trying to speak in another language and I can barely speak American.
I'm with you, brother.
Very, very barely speak American.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Wow, what a career. And obviously had an amazing career, and it spurred you becoming an author and a best-selling author of these two books. When did you decide to pick up the pen and memorialize these events?
Basically, it was about the time I retired from the U.S. Attorney's Office. One,
And
I
that's
had,
that's you on the cover, this guy?
yeah,
That's great.
basic difference a haircut will make, right?
You look like Jack Black and Nacho Libre. He had the big hair and the mustache.
You're right. You're right. Uh, there were, as I, as a federal prosecutor, I worked closely with FBI agents, DEA agents, other state agents, agents from other state, sheriff's offices, police departments, and all that on drug cases and other kind of cases. And the more I worked, the more I realized that my experiences undercover were rare. That few people had ever worked undercover for basically 10 years, and few people had worked undercover on different kinds of criminal organizations like I had, which were drug trafficking groups, Dixie Mafia auto theft rings, Mexican and Mafia smuggling organizations, uh, things like that. And I realized that it was pretty unique. And I thought, people might enjoy reading about that, not because it would be about me, but just because it'd be interesting experiences. So that's why I wrote Confessions of an Undercover Agent. Good thing about that is that book is published by University Press of Mississippi, which is the publishing firm of our 8 state universities. And I was honored that they saw the value in that book and published that book. Right after it was published, it became Amazon's #1 new release nationwide in popularity. And it
It's
was nominated,
fantastic.
yeah, it was nominated as best nonfiction, excuse me, Steve, by the uh, Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters. And since that time, I've done well over maybe 180 or 200 book talks and interviews like this with book talks and interviews with radio, TV, podcasts, and things like that. And in all of those, I try to talk about law enforcement profession and point out that some of these experiences in there just illustrate the things we're talking about: dedication, courage, excuse me, and compassion. And I wrote not only about me, but I wrote about the experiences of some other MBN agents in the book. So to me, the book helps get the word out to the public, and the book talks do too about our profession. Whirlwind, a Frank Marsh novel, after I wrote the first book, I just had these plots and characters built up in me based on different experiences I had and others had. And so I wrote Whirlwind, which is a thriller based on an FBI counterterrorism agent. And it goes from the deep south to the Mid East and Europe, and involves the uh, assassination and sabotage unit of Quds Force. And that book just flowed out. It only took me 2.5 months to write, then maybe a year and a half to refine it. And I've got the sequel almost done. So I'm enjoying the writing part, and I'm enjoying through that career meeting people and getting to visit with old friends as I go around, meet people and make new friends.
Heck yeah. You did the hard part, Charlie. You lived the life. Now you just gotta record it. You got all
Well,
you got
you're right. As I tell people, it was easier to write about it than it was to live it. But at the same time, reliving or thinking about some of those memories is like reaching out to touch a hot stove. It just sears you. And as you relive some of those experiences, it sears you just to do that. But
yeah.
I'm glad. I was doing an interview one time as a live TV interview at noon, and as the host introduced me, she said, "And now, and Charlie Spillers, what what do you think is the most notable thing about your undercover career?" That was her first question. And I looked at the camera and said, "The fact that I'm here to tell about
Good answer.
it." Yeah, that's right. Well, that's why I appreciate you and what you're doing, not just for me and what we're talking about, but basically the things that get the word out about our profession, what our profession is really about: the professionalism, courage, dedication, and compassion. Those things that mark us as true professionals.
Absolutely, John. I appreciate that. I have one more question that is the listeners really like, and it helps. We have a lot of people listening to the show that are in backgrounds with all from federal to state to local, city, and also in academy. They listen to the show. They find it encouraging to hear you guys talk about what this career is like and the crazy adventures you can have and the close calls. What advice would you give to new police officers, new agents getting on the job now?
Ooh, I wish I'd had time to think about that question. I'll tell you something that marked my career. Uh, I'm in my what I call my office at my home. The walls, there are plaques and commendations all over the walls. I've got some stacked up. There's no room for them, and they're from everyone. From anyway, they're all over the wall. Here's the thing, though: when I served in law enforcement as an officer, an agent, law enforcement commander, and later as a federal prosecutor, I never thought about doing something for recognition. All I thought about was how to do the best job I could. And that was what I focused on. Do the best job I could and to always do things the right way, morally, legally, and ethically. You can, as I tell people, you can always find a reason to do the wrong thing. You can always find a reason to do the wrong thing. And when I teach people, when I teach in academies, and I tell the officers, trainees in academies, a lot of them will go back to their departments, SOs and PDs, and I tell them, look, if you go back to your department, especially if it's one of these smaller ones, sometimes a larger one, and you don't have a good role model, find you a good role model. If you don't have a good role model, you be your own role model. You be your own role model. That's the person that you need to be. So that's the one thing I'd emphasize is just always do the right thing. And as I tell officers who want to go out here and get criminals or maybe bend things and not doing the right way, I say, is any criminal out there worth your badge? Is there any criminal worth your badge? Is any criminal worth going to prison for? And the answer, of course, is no. One time, after a big roundup on the coast, I think I made cases undercover on, I'm trying to remember, 80 or 90 heroin dealers from New Orleans to Mobile and along the Mississippi coast. And when they had the big roundup, big high profile roundup, it turned out that a couple of the heroin dealers, two or three of the heroin dealers, both had the same story that this an informant I'd used, had actually sold some dope to them, even though they were dope dealers, and said, "Hey, I want to sell this to Mike or whatever name I was using, but I owe him money, so I can't sell it to him. Will you sell it to him, and I'll give you part of the proceeds?" So he had. They were drug dealers, but we thought, wait a minute, there's probably something to that. So we polygraphed the informant, and he fessed up that he had done that with about three. And the people, although they were heroin dealers and had been heroin dealers, of course, those charges were dismissed against them. After the after the informant was polygraphed, I'd driven him up from the Gulf Coast to Jackson, about a 2 or 3 hour drive, and I picked him up after his polygraph. And he got in my car to go back, and he was just shaking his head about the polygraph. And he said, "You know what that man asked me?" I said, "Why?" He asked me, "Did Agent Spillers have anything to do with it? Did Agent Spillers, was he involved or know about it in any way?" And the informant said, I told that man, I said, "Man, that's the most honest man I ever met in my life." That's the informant saying that. And as I tell people when I train them, I say, look, regardless of whether I was the most honest man he had ever met or not, you want every informant you ever work with to believe that. You want every person that you ever encounter in law enforcement to believe that. That's what you want. And never say or do anything that you wouldn't want on the front page. And always assume when you're dealing with informants or you're dealing with anybody, always assume it's being secretly recorded. And if you do that, you'll have a great career and you'll accomplish a lot. I'm sorry, I'm just running on about this stuff.
That's
But
good
but
stuff. Words of wisdom.
look, we're talking about law enforcement. Remember this. This is my profession. I mean, I started in 1968 and I retired in 2012 and continued instructing, after that. And now I keep trying to spread the word about it. We're talking about your profession and my profession, and all of us have a duty to serve as role models for others and lead the right way. I'll get off the soapbox. I'm sorry, Steve.
No, that was great, Charlie. It's perfect. I was looking for words of wisdom. You gave them. Brother, thank you so much for coming on the show. Links to Charlie's books will be in the show notes, and also his social media, so you can follow him there. I'm going to do the outro to the show. Charlie, can you hold on for just like 3 or 4 minutes?
Sure. Thanks so much, Steve.
All right. Thank you, sir. It was an honor. The great Charlie Spillers, ladies and gentlemen, great stories. Honor to have him on. Thank you, Charlie. Guys, today is, this is the time today in the show that we thank the Patreon sergeants for keeping the boat afloat. Who I'm talking about is Lane Campbell, the great Gary Steiner, Adam Mehal, Chris June, the great and quite jacked Andy Biggs, Tony Fahey, everybody, Seth Wright, James Rose, the great John Shoemaker, Jake Pinito, Lauren Stimson, Jason Lau, the great Mike Wynn, Sasha McNabb, everybody, Braden Walker, Sean Clifford, the great Tammy Walsh, holding it down at dispatch, Scott Minkler, Ben Peters, Greg Gabboy, Iceman from the Motocrop Chronicles, George Tessier, Dennis Carrasquillo, the great Thomas Connell, everybody, Nick Noose, Wayne M. Miller, retired ATF and author. Check him out. Scott Young, Dan Carlson from Burley Boards, Doug and Kelly Newman. I'll see you at church. I love you. Joe DeFries, Richard Tolles, keep on trucking, brother. Dave Ellman, Elliot Sykes, Christian, Jace Crow, Kyle Roberts, the great Brad Thompson, Zach Haney, the great Nancy Hammond, everybody, and Clark Lakoff. I nailed it, brother. I got the pronunciation right. Guys, thank you so much for being there for the show. Thank you for the support. Truly appreciate it. If you want to show your support for the show monetarily, the link will be in the show notes, everybody. But I will see you guys next week.